Hi, I'm so happy to join you again this Friday. We took a little break, and I'm very, very excited to reignite the In the Know conversation series. My name is Olga Bolotina. I am chair of the SFB chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm also a lifelong enthusiast and environmental protection activist. And I am very excited to have this interview series where we bring leaders from the Sierra Club and other organizations who dedicate their work to environmental, to sustainability, and putting real basis and bring both real people for fighting real issues and bringing real solutions. So today I'm very excited to introduce Bill Smith, who I had really privileged to work with for many, many years within the Sierra Club. And then we discovered some other connections, which you're going to touch on. Bill is a singer. And also, so Bill been active with the Sierra Club for many years. I think that the most exciting thing that Bill is working on right now, and that I'm really curious about that to discuss, Sierra Club is taking very big leap to creating and supporting environmental and social justice. So Bill Smith is the co-chair of the Sierra Club California Committee for Environmental Justice. And also in his work life, he was the engineer for Chevron, which we're going to touch a little bit maybe controversial, but maybe not. Also was instrumental into closing several military bases. One of them is in Alameda, which is a huge also place where environmental things are playing out right now in Alameda. So Bill lives in Alameda and very active in housing issues. And we've been working on those issues for many years too. So Bill, without further ado, thank you so much for joining me today. And if you want to say just a little bit about yourself, maybe I missed some things that you want to plug in, and then we'll go into the rest of the conversation.
Well, you gave a pretty good overview of my major interests. Maybe I'll give you a real brief overview of my history in the Sierra Club. So after I got out of the Army and went to finished up a graduate school, I I I joined the Sierra Club because I worked at Chevron in toxics, and I thought, gee, there was a toxics committee that was involved. I thought it'd be nice to get involved there. And so that's what got me into the Sierra Club. And then a few years later, I moved to Alameda. And I'm an engineer, and I like to see things work efficiently. And Alameda had this little thing. Is 80, about 92. Alameda has this little charter ban which says, "Thou shalt not build multifamily housing." And in the middle of one of the biggest, most dynamic urban areas in the United States. And we all wanted to keep Alameda our own little suburb dating back to the 1900s. So I said that will change before I leave. So, and it's taken a while, but next week that charter ban is on the agenda. So if you want to hear more about that, be careful about asking me because I'll probably never stop. So back to you.
Save it for the last 5 minutes, so we have the limit.
Okay.
No, you're excited. That's right. It's been a long time coming, and I think that I know that you put a lot of work on that. So, and I want to go back a little bit because my big belief that a lot of things that we do in life are formed in our childhood, and a lot of our passions, and a lot of our convictions. So where did you grow up? Where did you come from to Alameda? Maybe a long story, but what are the things that stand out in your childhood that brought you to environmental protection, to be curious about those issues?
Well, you probably, I don't think I've told you this yet, Olga, but I do share some heritage from Russia. So my my great great grandparents immigrated from Russia One of them was I worked for a court, and that court came out on the wrong side of one of the struggles in there, and decided he needed to leave the country. So he went to Europe for a few years, and then eventually his family ended up coming in through St. Louis, uh, and then ended up in Dubuque, Iowa, and in Iowa. So that's where I was born, was in Iowa. My father grew up in New Mexico, but his father, my grandfather, was a doctor in Iowa State, and so that was on a lake. And so that's something that I remember. So we do have a little bit of Russian history in our family history book.
Now it all comes together. You totally look Russian.
All right. So my parents, because you're not Russian, you're Ukrainian, is that right?
Oh God, no, I am, I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Russia,
Oh, okay.
but and my mother's background was in Russia, all in Russia proper. My father, however, came to St. Petersburg to study. Actually, he's an engineer also. He's a shipbuilding engineer. But he came to St. Petersburg from Belarus. So, and
Okay.
his whole family is in Belarus and in Ukraine. So, it's just so weird for a lot of people that, Russia, Belarus, or Ukraine are so closely culturally connected that this whole divide is just unfortunate, for the better word. So, yeah, so I'm sort of both, or three in one. How about that?
Okay. So anyway, when I was growing up in Iowa, I learned that my great grandfather had been prosecuted during the Second World War because he went to study, or the First World War, as a German spy. Because as part of his graduate education or his education, he went to study chemistry in Sweden. And so the doctor in town that wanted to get the turf all to himself decided to bring a charge of espionage against him, and that was deleted. So we have politics in here to match yours of your ancestors back there in Russia. So, but in terms of my own upbringing, it was a lot quieter by the time I was born in middle Iowa. So my mother was probably my formative experience because my dad died when I was 10 in fifth grade of cancer. So they did that, and then one of the store owners in town, Mr. Leo Lidd, he owned a clothing store. He was the troop master of Boy Scout Troop 78, and so that was very important growing with him, and a lot of experiences there growing up. So, and uh, I don't know if you wanted to hear a little bit about my other formative childhood memories or not.
Depending how formative they are. Yes, it sounds like growing up in Iowa, of course, in my recent memory, Iowa is coming up in political connotation, the story about freezing people. So I don't want to go necessarily, but Iowa, I never been there. So what are those stories
Well,
that's sort of actually present, or did you get present to environmental sort of, around you?
well, some of them are relevant, and Iowa, they're different than what most people grew up in an urban area experience. So, before I was in school, one of my first memories was crying after I stayed up all night trying to keep two little chickens from the hen house alive, and I didn't, and they died. I just the heating lamp and all those other things. So, um, that was something, and then. So another thing which taught me that institutions can change early on was in second grade. My nun, who was my teacher, really lectured us and chastised us for not praying hard enough because if we had prayed better, it wouldn't have rained on our first communion. so, so even as a second grader, that seemed a little extreme to me. I remember, and then so a year or two later, the Second Vatican came through, and I couldn't articulate it at the time, but I realize now why I thought that was so good because now no longer was church in Latin; it was in English, and all the rest of that, and that came pretty quickly to Iowa, and then my great grandfather's house on Lake Okoboji had no water treatment. It just pumped in the water from the lake, And it was the first house on the lake too, and it still had the same watering system. So I learned some appreciation for progress, both from the Second Vatican and from the water treatment system, which we eventually installed at that old lake house. And there was also an old hand crank record player, and that was hard to listen to song after song on that because you have to get up between songs and change the record and recharge it. So, but it was fun, just being old. So those are some of the things that I learned up. Then hunting pheasants was something else that probably not many people around here have done.
The what? What was the last time?
Hunting pheasants. So those are birds, are very colorful birds.
Wow. Well, you know what? I got hung up on I was like, okay, the water was coming from the lake into the house. Where was water, gray water and black water going out to be in the house without the plumbing?
Oh, it went into a cesspit. So it's just a little hole. And that still, I was on the Alameda County Planning Commission. We have a lot of those in our county, in our unincorporated areas. All your gray water and your water from the toilets goes into this hole in the ground. And most of them are lined now. Many of them are tanks. And it sits there for a while, and then it's just pumped and infiltrated into the gravel pit spread around it. So that's what we have.
Sounds about familiar. You know, when I was growing up in Russia, it was like some of the stories that I can tell, people will probably raise their eyebrows because we also, you know, grew up in the city, but it was a lot of Russians have dachas, which is, you know, outside of the city, little plot of land to, you know, the sprawl, we call it here now. But a lot of people grew their own vegetables, you know, their own food, quite frankly, but there was no plumbing.
All right.
And no septic tanks necessarily. So it was all natural. So anyway, one of those days I should probably do a separate, you know, story on that, living in Russia. And
Well, we did have a cistern at that Gold Lake house, and that was where you collected fresh rainwater off the roof and other things. And so you get your cleaner water from that if you needed it for something.
So in the unit, I also was so surprised at one point when I heard that in the United States, in some places, it's against the law to collect rainwater. To me, it was just what are you talking about? So and to me, it's such a good source of water, especially, you know, where you don't have access. So anyway, that's a whole other tangent. But going back to hunting pheasants, you said?
Yes, that's right.
Wow. All right. With a bow and arrow, or with what did you hunt? How did you hunt?
Oh, well, I originally hunted with a 410, but that doesn't do very good for bringing them down. But when I got a little older, a 12 gauge shotgun, and that's a very popular sport in the Midwest. And the cornfields really work well. They hide in the cornfields. But the thing that it did for me in terms of environmentalist, it introduced me to all the wild creatures because you run across the raccoons and the porcupines, and then we had beavers. We had a creek that ran through our property, and the beavers just built little dams instead of that. And you learn not to leave them enough habitat. You learn to take care of them, and there's nobody that gets more upset about overhunting than hunters themselves, good hunters, because that means it spoils it for everybody. So it's a very good thing to help protect and to learn. And I wasn't old enough when my dad was alive to hunt with him, but my uncle, when he came, we would always go hunting. I was never very good at hunting. I didn't bring that because I didn't take it too seriously. The other thing we did as kids, we had all kinds of pigeons in the barn where we had the hayloft on the top, and so they're always jumping. So even when I think when I was in third or fourth grade, we'd go out there with BB guns and shoot to scare the pigeons out of the way. So that's something which is hard experience to get in an urban area where people are very concerned about shooting off guns, and quite rightly so, outside. So some of the differences.
As you know, I'm definitely against the trophy hunting. There's just no question for me there. It's absolutely disgusting in my opinion. But I have to say, I mean, my grandfather was also a hunter, and I know hunters who are very concerned about the environment. And you're absolutely right. People who are doing it um, consciously, and they understand that you can take only as much as you need, and this particular biosystem can give you. So, like hunting wild boar that is invasive, well, considered to be invasive species, or turkeys, if they are overpopulated, I think that's probably okay, if you do it again, under the laws and regulations.
Well,
So,
that's interesting. You should mention wild boar because we do have wild pig hunting in the county of Alameda. And
okay.
when I was on the county planning commission, one of the highlights of every year was a wild boar roast put on by one of the I can't remember, it was a farmer or rancher in eastern Alameda County. And so they'd go out there and pick them up. But those boar have to be got off the land somehow or other, so might as well make a party out of it. So, and they did that. But that's one of the few remnants. So that's what, when I got into, when the Sierra Club asked me if I was interested in serving on the county planning commission, Alameda County Planning Commission, I thought about my rural background, and I said, "Oh, well, that sounds like it'd be kind of good." And there was just enough of the rural in the East County left, and there was the fair and a lot of the pig raising. I raised pigs as a child and shoveled the pig manure, and the out and the straw and all the other things. And my brothers raised geese and ducks, and my aunt locked myself and my brother, younger brother, locked myself and my aunt in the chicken house for a couple hours one afternoon. So we we, had to, we weren't happy.
Yeah. What, I want to take a little pause. I want to check. So our wonderful Zephyr is helping with the stream, and I just wanted to check if the sound is good, because when on my end, when I'm listening to you, Bill, my sound is a little bit, so I have a hard time distinguishing what you're saying. So I just want to make sure that the sound is okay. Sounds fine. All right. So maybe it's just my feedback. So I want to make sure that people hear what you're saying, because this is so fun. I don't think we engage in conversations about hunting here very often. So, but it's interesting. I've never known actually that Alameda is like, how did wild pigs get there? But we didn't also touch on your planning commission work, because that's a whole other realm. People, I don't think, who are not involved in government work, appointed or elected leadership, might not know how much work goes into the planning commission and how many actually decisions get made at the planning commission level. So it's an extremely important position, and a lot of responsibility, and done for free. So volunteer. And I know that you have to read sometimes very, very thick packages of materials. So, but we'll get there. So from Iowa, how did you end up in California?
Well, in Iowa, I went to Boy State, and I had a lot of fun with the Boy Scouts, and so I got a scholarship to the Army, ROTC. So I went through the Army ROTC program at Iowa State. And then I was very excited about engineering, chemical engineering, and I did research as an undergraduate in the laboratory in biological engineering, bioengineering, taking enzymes to break down starch in corn to make sugar. And I learned 20 years later that we were all too successful, because now sugar is so cheap, and now we're abusing it. It's in everything. But it worked very well to expand the market for corn. So it did what it was supposed to do. But so he encouraged me to apply to graduate school. So I did, and applied to several. And I just like Stanford. Maybe one of the reasons was one of my cousins grew up in California, and he came out and visited us at that lake house of my great grandfather's quite often, and he brought with him Mad magazine. And I looked at that magazine. What is this? A little Iowa farm boy.
What is the magazine?
Oh, Mad Magazine. It's a crazy. That's right. Some of the younger generation may not know much, but it was pictures of Alfred on the photo. I'm sure you must have seen a picture of him somewhere. The head, and it has these bizarre stories that are typical California hippies, and just makes satire. Nothing is sacred in that magazine. It attacks everything and uses bad language. So. Uh, and I think it came out. But if you ever get a chance to look at one of the videos they make of it, or thumb through an old it might have made a return a couple years back. But it was.
You know what? You just need to listen to the news lately. It's like a Mad magazine. I'm sorry. It's like,
Oh, this is.
a lot more madness in my life. Maybe not.
Oh,
But
this the news lately is just tailor made for Mad Magazine and all of the. It would you wouldn't even have to edit some of it to put it in Mad Magazine.
it's true. Who would have thought, right?
That's right.
I want to know now what was considered mad back then. Yeah, it's all tame now. Oh, boy.
Some
So you
of
saw why Mad Magazine, you decided, oh my God, I have to be in California, right?
That's right.
Boy, okay. So what's the journey? What did you discover in California? When did you come to California?
Well, I came to California in '77, and to do that, I had to put off my service in the Army, so which was okay. And I got involved in bioengineering at Stanford University, so entered that program over there. And the major thing I worked on there was for my graduate work was a little capillary system. It was used to there were hollow fiber membranes used to make reverse osmosis for water, and so they're still around. They were pretty new back then, and I worked with Alan Michaels too, who was the founder of one of the major membrane companies that made them, and we wanted to use them to culture cells. And so this is for bio because bacterial cells. And the idea was engineering efficiency. There's that theme again. You'll hear that again and again. That there's a lot of when you have when you brew yeast, you put them in this big tank with water. There's only a tenth of a percent by volume is yeast. The rest of it is just wasted water. So what we need to do is to come up with something that we can grow them 1,000th of volume just to have them grow right next to one another. And so you can do that by putting these hollow fibers in. They work just like your blood capillaries, and your cells go right up next to the blood capillaries, and you run the nutrients through, and they take the waste out, and so you get it. So I did it. I got them to grow very, very nicely. They grew and they packed in with nice hexagonal packing, which means that's the most efficient way to do it. But there's always a but, almost always with these new things. They also generate a lot of pressure, and they collapse the fibers. So the fibers don't work too well.
Catalyst, almost like a catalyst.
Yeah, the yeast are but they're self-reproducing catalysts.
Pretend I'm an engineer.
So that is exactly it. So that was the next part of the work, was to get them to grow up in there to the high density, and then turn them off so they wouldn't grow anymore, and they would just make. This case, it was an enzyme to make that enzyme and roll, or make alcohol. And today it's more fruitful. So I've watched that, and people.
Right. Fruitful now, alcohol prices are going up.
That's right.
Might go back to it. Oh boy. Okay. So, and that was to also produce alcohol, and also went into the sort of sugar producing.
Well, it could. We didn't. The major thing we made from it was penicillinase. It was just a protein, because the idea was to make proteins and other things that would have a high medicinal value, or else you could use this was before the enzymes were really popular in detergents, so that you could make large quantities to put them in detergents and use them for detergents, and so lots of things, and then the other things, and then it turned out to be really 20 years later, I came back to that Lawrence Livermore National Lab and used the same basic approach to study, just really study how we can algae make starch. And so I did try that actually at Lawrence Livermore Lab, growing up the algae in starch. They were thin on the outer side of these membranes, and the sunlight could get in, and then I could put the nutrients through, and then I solved the problem about having them collapse the fibers by I took out a key nutrient, sulfur, which when they grow up the concentration I wanted, and then the sulfur also had the effect when it's short on sulfur, they make even more starch, and so we could pack it up so I could have this reactor make practically a 80-90% starch. I had a low budget though, and it wasn't until the very end that I found out I had a problem with the starch, and that was the sulfur. That even though all the chemicals I used said there was no sulfur in them, there was a trace of sulfur in them. I got them to go to a lab, and that was enough to let the algae continue to grow. So I didn't go back.
Starch, I was like, I'm trying to make the connection. The starch would be used in what? Starching shirts?
No, starch is used to make biofuels. So that's your cornstarch, you put that into alcohol. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, no, and that's, I mean, I was joking, obviously, but I was starch. But not nobody uses it now anymore in COVID. But it's actually a good transition, because I exactly wanted to ask you about biofuels, because we're also talking about biofuels on a California level, and what is the Sierra Club policy there. It's a little too early to talk about that, but I wanted to ask you about biofuels and a little bit sort of what is the future you think, and the most method, because I also heard about algae growing and the whole recycled oil to biofuels. So if you have an opinion of what is the sort of the most efficient and best way to produce them.
Oh, I have lots of opinions on biofuels, so I'm glad to share them there. And I always look for input back on them, because it's an evolving field. But my basic take on biofuels is that they provide a lot of energy, mainly political, and not much use for not much for useful work. Okay, and yeah, that happened. I even when I was back in Iowa State as an undergraduate, when we were talking about doing this and making fuels from corn out of it, I said, this doesn't seem like it's going to really yield that much energy coming out of it. In fact, at the time, it was negative. It took more energy to get to process the starch into fuel than it did. Corn makes starch. Algae makes starch. So starch is often a common thing. And so, well, why do we want to be with corn? Why do we with corn? Well, the reason we wanted to be with corn is because the government always paid farmers a whole bunch of money not to grow it, because we would make too much and flood the market. Okay, so it was for price supports. So if you're gonna, so rather than put it off the market, why don't you make it into alcohol? And so then you can get rid of the price supports, and you just require the refineries to put it in and blend it in. And the other thing which was different about it was in Brazil, they use sugar cane. When you break starch down, into sugar. And so sugar cane and sugar is one step closer to alcohol. So really, corn can't compete with starch or with sugar. And so, but we had a fix for that too. We put a high tariff on any sugar imported from Brazil. And so these are not in keeping with my vision of efficient use of resources. So, and
of course, you know what, we there was a big debate a couple 3 years ago on sugar sweetened beverages, all the bills that were introduced locally, and whether or not Sierra Club should take a position on them. And I was actually writing a paper in favor of Sierra Club taking a position, because I looked into the whole sugarcane production as one of them. I mean, I'm not talking even about beets and the corn and all that. just the sugar cane alone, the practices of growing sugar cane and processing are horrific. I mean, the whole burning of the fields, the cutting of the forests, then the high energy to produce the sugars. Actually, a high level of water use. It was just absolutely astounding. A lot of people do not understand that when we talk sugar cane, it's basically equals destruction of ecosystem. Period. So it was very enlightening to me, and I was like, well, huge environmental impact of sugar, period. We have to take a position, not to even mention the whole environmental justice aspect. People are breathing all the fumes and stuff. Anyway, I can go on a tangent, which I did just now, but yes, to the point that people, sugar is a poison for us, and it's poison for the environment, so don't eat sugar. Give up sugar.
That's right. Well, my work at Iowa State, that was exactly what it's producing the starch for, the enzymes for, was to break down and make those sugars cheap to go in soft drinks and food. But in terms of bioenergy, back to that policy, why do we want to develop a lot of cropland with all the problems you point, whether it's sugar or corn, produce something that all the carbon dioxide ends up back up in the air anyway? Why? It's at best it's a transitional fuel from petroleum to solar or electric or other geothermal or whatever they are. So that's my view on it. But if it does help with that transition, there's some value in that. There is value in political energy. The club understands that. It's a very political organization. So I do not have a fixed position on it, but it's let's just say that it'll have to prove that it really greases and makes the political system much more efficient. I'm afraid I do have a pretty fixed position on what it means in terms of real contribution to the energy and the CO2 reduction. So in the immediate future, it's greasing the skids for later. And speaking of that, there seems to be a real market for grease these days. There's a real market for cooking grease, and I don't understand where a lot of the refiners are going to get their cooking grease that they're planning to use when they convert now. So that's,
you mean because all the restaurants are closing and all the cooking sort of?
No, the grease is already spoken for from many other people and contracts. It's already under contract. So.
Oh wow. Well, that's a good problem, I guess, to have in some ways. I mean, so you talking about biofuels, making biofuels from the oil that was used in restaurants or big facilities to produce frozen foods or whatever that is. So because a lot of people maybe not thinking about the biofuels and that whole system, but I think that maybe both of us agree on that. Home phone. Oh my God.
Oh, okay. There, I got it. It's just ringing on my computer. I'll turn my fax machine off now too.
Hey, it's always good when somebody wants to contact you. Of course, through the home phones, a lot of spam calls come in.
That's for sure.
So anyway, so I think that to me, because this whole circular economy, when you're taking the waste of one industry and you're making it into the raw material for another industry, it sort of closed loop is what we ultimately would want to come to. So the extraction of resources happens only once, and hopefully never again, and they just get recirculated. So and that's the principle in using cooking grease here for biofuels, and I think that's ultimately the best solution for best solution make least bad solution for producing biofuels. Right, but that's a good problem to have if all the grease is spoken for, because I was just say, well, we have so many, opportunities, but.
Right, but in terms of the total volume of the grease market, oils, it's probably not going to make much of a dent in the fuel supply. So the volumes that we use for that are much. But that, if we look into that later, we'll be able to have some real hard numbers to compare that.
Well, of course, there also a question about the infrastructure and also, cars that can take biofuel, because biofuel is different than regular fuel. So my Honda, for example, cannot take biofuel, right? You have to retrofit the engine. Is that correct?
Yes, it depends. If you run it through a refinery, though, the refineries can transform it into real meeting specs, especially the diesel part. They get it, but it's generally more expensive to do that. But so there's just a lot of things, a lot of questions that I'm not familiar with yet. But if that task force gets going, probably you and I will know something more about it in a couple months.
Oh boy, we have to do a whole episode on the biofuels. I think that that you suggested that, and I think it's a good idea. There's so many things that go, thrown on. This is so good for environment. When you dig deep, it's just there's so many controversies. So, but anyway, so you were working at Stanford. That was exciting. So you sort of started working there on biofuels, and then you went to straight to Chevron, or how did?
No, then after Chevron, after Stanford, I went out. I did my Army service out in Boston, Massachusetts, at the Natick Research and Development Center. And that laboratory I chose because it had one of the best enzymologists in the country there, Mary Mandels, and another gentleman. Uh, and they were working with, during Vietnam, there was a big problem with gasoline being eaten by fungi and microbes, and also with clothing being eaten. And so that's what Mary Mandels did there, is she isolated all the microbes that did that work. And so they had them there, and they got into fuels. And my own particular work that I did out there was to develop enzymes that would destroy nerve agents. And so one of the stories I remember from that work, this is the mid '80s, and things were a little different then. But we couldn't even work with in at the lab itself. We couldn't even work with chemicals used that were like nerve agents, but that were used in hospitals. They were considered too dangerous for us to work with there, and too much of really it was too much of a public relations problem. So what we did is we went down to Cape Cod, and we had a lab at Cold Spring Harbor. We worked with not just the hospital chemicals, but we had a gentleman from Chicago who would just come out and he'd synthesize real nerve agent, live nerve agent right out there. And we would use that to make it. And we were out there one fall, and there was a hurricane coming up the coast. And it's getting a little windy around here. So about 4 hours before it hit, we decided we'd close down and we closed down our operations there and get rid of the nerve agent. And then we came back to Boston. And I got back to Boston about 1 hour before the worst of the storm hit. So,
That was a good question. Oh my God. But I was like, from biofuels to nerve agents. I was like, agents. Wow, that's quite a jump. So,
biology, still biology.
while biology is actually amazing, I wanted to. So the microbes that were eating benzene and gasoline, are those the same microbes that we like oil spills on in the ocean or on the ground?
Yeah, they can be used for that, and so that brings me from the Army lab. I went to Chevron, and I had a choice when I went to Chevron. I got an offer from their grease division, which is typical for
Grease division.
yeah, basically it was for lubricants. It was actually lubricants, but they had specialty greases for joints and balls and bearings, and their big customer was the sugar plantations out in Hawaii. Because that was very hard. The warm, moist atmosphere is very hard and corrosive on these, and they had a lot of the grease. And then I had another offer from them in their environmental services division, and the grease division was more a PhD research type, corresponding to my background at Stanford. But I said no, I wanted to get into environmental, and so I took really was a BS position there.
Yeah, I
and
was going to say in the belly of the beast. How? that go. But the lubricants, you're talking about lubricants for machinery, not for human joints.
No, for machinery. Yes, that's right. The the sugar harvesters and the thrashers and so on. And also, I think they had a division for the products for cars too.
Mhm. Products for cars, you mean lubricants also?
Lubricants for cars. Yeah, that's right.
Because I think that, actually, I want to ask you that because I think a lot of people, and I think I didn't really get present to it until very recently, that a lot of fossil fuels are used for plastic production. So I don't know if it's done, at the refineries or if it's done elsewhere where the fuels go. So I don't know if you
Oh, there's huge. What the refineries do is they take the raw petroleum out of the ground, petroleum. Let's call it a feedstock, because then we have biological feedstocks and petroleum feedstocks, and they'll refine it and they'll make gasoline, and then they'll make diesel fuels, and they will have some things that they can't refine, or they'll have some things that they can make more money by selling. Then they'll often sell them to a Dow Chemical or DuPont, and then they will take often the feedstocks from the refineries will be their starting point, and they'll refine to make the exact chemicals that are needed. And some of those are pretty. Some of those chemical plants, the chemicals are almost as large a scale as petroleum, but not quite. But they're huge. You
Yeah,
could,
so the fossil fuels are used to produce plastics, right? Most,
oh yes, they are definitely.
because a lot of people, I'm really sort of
Well,
with the whole conversation about the single-use plastics, and it's like you have to understand that a large portion of fossil fuels are actually going to the plastic produce. So it's sort of a huge double whammy where you're polluting the environment when you're extracting those biofuels, putting them, refining them, etc. And also on the back end where you throwing those single-use plastics or any plastics really into the environment. So it's just completely terrible proposition for the earth all around and for
well, I'm working for the Plastic Manufacturers Association, but they keep the CO2 sequestered, throwing the plastics away in the ground. Okay, but quick correction: it's not fossil fuels that go into the plastics; it's the petroleum feedstock. All right, and so it's an offshoot, could be an offshoot of the fossil fuel production, but the fuels generally don't. But the fuels are a particular blend, but the components of the fuels do go into the feedstock. So I'm being picky.
feedstock then. Yeah, that's a thank you for I'm having educational moment and I appreciate it a lot actually. So what is the stock feedstock? What are they comprised of? It's basically it also extracted together blend with the fossil fuels.
Oh no, the fossil fuel is the petroleum is the feedstock, the oil you get out of the ground. That's the feedstock. And when you go into a refinery, the way that works is you refine it into the different portions. So the petroleum has many different kinds, and then not all. Some of those are very heavy, and so you have to crack them so that you heat them up high. You put them under pressure, and you break the molecule in half or thirds, and they come on down. And so you produce the different types of chemicals with different numbers of carbon chains, different lengths, different amounts of hydrogen saturation. So that's why you have hydrocrackers to add hydrogen to it. And so you get all of those things together. But the ultimate thing is for gasoline, you basically end up with BTEX. You may have heard about that. And so that's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. So those are the four things. And those are all those are blended and with some other things to make your gasoline. And you can use benzene or toluene or ethylbenzene or xylene as a feedstock for a chemical plant as well. So you may not blend them back together again. So that's how they're related. So
Wow. Oh boy. That's another and that's another topic that we should probably discuss, especially with you can put up all in the bite-sized pieces, which I'm learning. So and then I do want to talk a little bit about the current not current, but the Planning Commission and Alameda and all of that, it's a big jump also. But if you wanted to mention anything about the biofuels and the chemistry, without getting into details, because like how far can we go with that? Because I'm also, I have a little bit background in chemistry, so for me it's a little bit geeking out. But I want to be conscious of all the people who are listening about us geeking out in chemistry here.
Well, I have a personal connection to biofuels because my great grandfather, when he made that trip back to Scandinavia to study chemistry, one of the things he worked on was trying to break down cellulose, which is in grass and in wood, and did it with an acid production. So this was back in the 1800s. and cellulose is still something we're not good at breaking down. We don't know how to do it economically. And so and there's a lot of work going into that. So that's something that has to be cracked. It's very difficult to do that. I'm not very optimistic about being able to do the scale up of any of these. I think biofuels, the biofeedstocks you take is if you've got a carbon feedstock waste from tree production, you want to clear some, like President Trump, we want to sweep the forests. We can take the sweepings, we put it in the feedstock, maybe. All right. If you can't find something, well, why put something when you got your carbon sequestered? Why put it back in the feedstock and into the air? So that's a fundamental problem I have to deal with on that. So, and then other places like that, the grease. If you don't have any other market where you can keep the carbon sequestered, then okay, you can direct it towards that. The one place where it may make sense, but we're probably a couple decades away from that, and that's what I was working at Lawrence Livermore, is algae. Because a lot of petroleum was formed from algae. Algae grow suspended. They make all kinds of stuff. Not only do they make starch, but some of these algae make oil directly. And it's very close to what you need. So if we can teach them how to do that and do it in quantities and learn how to grow them, and they do it from sunlight too, and they're much more efficient than our solar collectors too. So that I think is exciting and it has potential, but we're a long ways from it. Exxon was the only oil company that really went for algae. They're the most conservative one, but they were the ones that were the most hard-nosed, and they took a look at the other feedstocks and said, no, the only one that can work in our business is algae. But now Exxon is having to really cut that back now with all the drop in oil sales and so on. All the oil companies are having a big problem. I've got a niece and a nephew who work for Chevron, so I guess they followed my way, and they give me an inside report on what's happening inside the oil industry right now, and it's not pretty.
But why? Because I kept hearing about algae. I about algae production, biofuel production, 10 years ago when I was at Presidio School of Management, Sustainable MBA, and the work had been going on for years before that. So what is exactly the problem? Because from what I understand, you can actually produce a lot of oil, which you're right, absolutely, much closer to what we actually need to produce the usable material. And you can also produce a lot of quantities, because I heard about vertical farms where you can put a lot of algae at the same place. So why is it not being developed?
There's basically two reasons why. One is the cost of the feedstock, all right, and then the third is is the rate at which the algae produce the oil. So, and when you're going to do it on a huge scale, if you have a slow rate, that means you have to have an enormous volume, and that means large, very expensive equipment and hard to make. The other thing is, yeah, you can use the air, carbon dioxide in the air, as the feedstock for oil, or for the algae. They do a good job about that, but that slows down the rate even more. And so the first people that marketed algae-made biofuels and starch, they didn't use CO2 from the air. They used glucose from cornstarch as their feed. But they didn't tell you that when they advertised it, did they? So, but
because I kept thinking that it's good sort of on both ends. It sequesters CO2 because, algae does absorb CO2 to grow, like a lot of plants do. And then, you produce biofuel. Of course, when you burn biofuel, you still emit CO2, I'm assuming, right? And so it's kind of, a little bit of a wash off, but yeah, that's interesting to know how things work sometimes when they're not advertised. So basically we're coming back to, you have to grow corn or sugar cane or something to feed the algae and feed, to produce then burn them and to produce.
Have to produce them fast and fast. Okay. Now, but maybe in 20 years we won't.
It seems like it all boils to use less, drive less, reuse.
Oh, you are not going to be very popular in the capitalist economy we run, where it's always grow, grow, grow.
Different subject about how we measure our happiness and our success. I think the whole mind shift has to happen. That things are not going to get us any happier. Connections, human connections, and But anyway, I mean, we have very. I could keep talking a long time, and I have this feeling sort of with a lot of my people that I'm talking, because there's so much great work happening and people are so excited about it and so passionate. So I'm just constantly fascinated. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what are you working on now, what excites you now, what the lessons learned from your work.
Well, if I step back for a minute and look at it from an efficiency standpoint, there's been no better thing that could have happened to my work than the COVID pandemic. Because all the things that I've known and have been obvious to me for decades now have suddenly become obvious to almost everybody, except for maybe a few people in Washington, D.C. And we won't talk about that. So, all right, so we've got the inequalities are really becoming highlighted up. We've had now, besides the COVID, we've had finally the climate change things have really started to focus. All the hurricanes down the south and the worsening of them, and then the fires here. So it's a good time to get people motivated. Now I have to figure out how to direct that energy. And so with the housing crisis here and with the danger, we have a hard time controlling COVID because people live in overcrowded housing. And so we need to build more affordable housing, and that makes everybody safer. And so this is a real time to go through with that. And so I'm hoping that this Measure Z in Alameda passes, which would eliminate this almost 50-year-old ban on multifamily housing. Now, it in and of itself will not help us with affordable housing because we have a lot of magical thinking. And there's one thing I'd like to emphasize to our readers is please don't engage in magical thinking. Make sure you understand how you can implement your vision and make it work. So yes, we passed Measure Z. Yes, we can build affordable housing in Alameda. How are we going to pay for it?
And it's always a question, with past laws and legislations. And I think that a lot of times the maintenance part falls out of the paying equation. And I think that more and more people start and so like, okay, well, we implement this, but then we have to maintain it also. And in the example of affordable housing, it takes so many resources to actually implement one project. So where the resources are coming from, you're right. So where are they coming from?
Well, we could get them, but this would mean to really fix the housing process, we have to transform a lot of beliefs, rigid, magical thinking in the whole United States. We have to get away from the idea that your major way to pay for retirement for the middle class should be your home. We have to regard housing as a utility, like we do, that's essential to life, like we do water and electricity and natural gas, things to keep it heated. and we regulate those. We don't let speculators tie it up. We don't ask for we don't demonstrate at our city halls and say, don't approve that housing. We got to stop that traffic. We've got to do this and that. No, this isn't absolutely necessary for people to live. And if we don't do that, we're going to have more and more homeless on our streets. And then the most insidious thing about it is that everybody gains by building market rate housing. And everybody thinks they understand economics and the law of supply and demand. Well, we do not have a free market in housing. Somebody controls the permitting for that, and that's the government. And so we're badly out of balance. And if we build market rate housing in the center, we're not going to trickle it down. And we've got lots of urban displacement projects. Berkeley does this. We're not going to trickle that down to the low income people, because we're going to have all the people commuting in from the suburbs want to move back in, and the high paid jobs. And Alameda is a perfect example. The biggest backer of Measure Z is the funder, is not a developer, and the opponents don't understand this yet. It's the biggest, fastest growing employer at Alameda, Penumbra, a medical devices company, and they're stymied if they can't get more housing for their workers, and they mean market rate housing is what they want. So they're not committed to that. So we have to work on that.
Passion, it's amazing when your whole demeanor switched when you start talking about Alameda housing, and it's true. It's such a humongous issue, and I think I agree that people think that if we put the supply where demand is, we're going to house everybody. It's just absolutely not true, because housing that has been built all over market rates, even now when the rents falling down, is unaffordable for majority of people, even the ones who are employed. So absolutely agree with you. We do need more affordable housing, and deeply affordable housing for more of it, absolutely. And then field development, I think that's also crucial, so we don't sprawl. But we have only
one more thing I've got to get in, but you can't tell anybody about it. The best, most efficient way to fund that housing is to make Prop 13 go away for all housing, and reassess and divert, and all that money goes to affordable housing. And that does a number of things. It also depresses the price of housing and makes it cheaper for everybody. And most of the mortgage interest deductions and the property tax go to the wealthiest people, and it's getting more and more of the wealthier. So it's a very regressive tax.
I personally agree with you, and that's another, I think that's another very good topic for people to look into. So we have a couple minutes left only. I think that people really got the passion across: affordable housing, affordable transportation, making sure that everybody, all the human needs are taken care of before we can ask people to care for environment, because it's such an esoteric notion for a lot of people when they cannot put food on their table and house themselves and house their children. So we cannot expect people to care about climate there unless they are fed, taken care of. I absolutely agree with you. So anything that you want to leave people with, lessons learned, things that people to keep in mind in their work and their advocacy?
I do. I want to be sure to mention what's happening in LA right now, or been happening for the last 3 decades. There's a huge problem with lead contamination from emitted by a factory that's been reprocessing lead acid batteries for decades. And the company, today's the last day the company will exist. It's going bankrupt, and the community gets stuck with the cleanup. And there's hundreds of people have been lead poisoned. 100,000 people the yards have been poisoned, probably in the area. So it's a huge mess. And my colleagues down there are working hard on that. That's Yvonne Watson and Charming Evelyn, and they're the Environmental Justice Committee down there. And all these problems could be, the thing I want to leave people with is, if you love your neighbor as yourself and be mindful of what you do, then you'll house your neighbor, refrain from polluting their air, their soil, their water, and make sure they have food. So that is what I'd like to leave people with.
Thank you so much, Bill. This is amazing. And actually, if I may add, love yourself, because you cannot love anybody else before you love yourself. That means also take care of yourself, take care of your body, mind, and spirit. And hopefully we can reiterate that. Thank you so much. Oh my God, that's been such a pleasure. And we didn't even get into your singing. I cannot believe it. But anyway, Bill and I discovered that we actually have mutual connections through the choir that Bill is singing in. And now, well, if you want to tell people that you're looking for, are you looking for some?
Yes, we're looking for a director. So if you know somebody that was looking for a 1 day a week starting the summer of 2021, 2022, don't have to speak German, but it would be nice if you did. We just need somebody who knows the music and is willing to learn and work with a bunch of cranky old German immigrants. So, and some younger folks too, like myself. Olga may not consider me younger, but in that crowd I am.
I happen to know the choir that Bill is singing in, and it's amazing choir. They do amazing stuff. They perform and during the holidays, and it's just really a good tradition to keep up. Yes, knowledge of German is beneficial, but not required. So if you're interested in becoming a director choir and to lead it, please contact Bill.
Or joining
Oh, what?
joining the choir too.
All right. Well, we should put it in the comments on the Facebook. But people.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. I'm looking forward to working on the affordable housing, transportation, and biofuels now. So on all the task force we are in. Thank you everybody for joining. Again, Bill Smith and Olga Bolotina with the Sierra Club. Truly appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you learned a lot and just had fun. And that's what it's for, to present you with some knowledge, with some environmental tips, and also to entertain a little bit. I think we all need a little bit of a, shoulder to cry, to laugh, to be humans on, So thank you so much. We'll see you next day. Oh my God, that's the t-shirt. I love it. I want that t-shirt. I want your t-shirt. I want a t-shirt like yours.
Take care of it. Take care of that home.
Take care of our home. Thank you so much, everybody. Bill and I will stay for just a second, and I'll see you next Friday. Thank you. Bye. And vote. Oh my God, vote.
Yes.
Vote. The main thing, vote. Vote Tuesday. All right. Yay.